The Substance has been an absolute breakout hit in the horror genre, as well as just in the world of movies in general. It's one of my favourite horror movies I've seen in a long time, and I know a lot of people are itching for some similar movies to watch, so I've put together a list. I'm going to try and make recommendations based off different aspects from The Substance that people might have enjoyed. So whether you were a fan of the extreme body horror, the themes of beauty standards, or like the campiness and surreal aspects of The Substance, there will definitely be a movie suggestion for you in here. My first recommendation is Starry Eyes from 2014, which I think you'll enjoy if you liked the themes of Hollywood elites in The Substance, as well as a main character who's obsessed with the world seeing and loving her. This movie follows an aspiring actress called Sarah. She hates her job as a waitress and wants more than anything to become a star, but after having a weird audition for some people with questionable intentions, it leads her down a deadly path where she will do whatever it takes to achieve her goal. So of course this movie is more focused on obsession with fame and success, more so than beauty and looks, like The Substance, but I feel like there's absolutely a huge crossover there. Elizabeth Sparkle was definitely also wanting to recapture the fame that she once had. This group of Hollywood elites in Starry Eyes really reminded me of the mystery of the people from The Substance, particularly with those phone interactions they're having. Even though obviously we never find out in The Substance who's on the other end of that phone, as that's not what the story is about. We get a little bit more of that in Starry Eyes as Sarah is actually meeting these people in person and having some very uncomfortable and disturbing interactions with them. This is categorized as a body horror even though it's in a more subtle way, but it definitely still has its moments. In fact, there are some that are extremely similar to The Substance, which I won't spoil, especially towards the end. So yeah, it's definitely worth giving a watch if that sounds intriguing to you. This next suggestion is the most recent release as it literally just came out, and that is the movie Grafted. And this was one that as soon as the trailer was released I saw a ton of people saying that it was giving Substance vibes, so of course I had to immediately check it out. This movie follows a socially awkward but brilliant Chinese student that wins a scholarship into a prestigious New Zealand university. But she is an outcast in this new environment, so she uses her studies to find a new way of achieving the popularity she craves, one bloody body at a time. Instead of becoming a better version of yourself, this movie is more about taking over someone else's life, someone who is considered more pretty or more popular. Some of the body horror in this one really got me. There's a lot of moments that feel similar to when Sue feels the bone popping out, or when she's trying to cover up her teeth and nails falling out towards the end. Our main character in Grafted, we see similarly struggle to keep up this facade, trying to play it cool, but then we see a chunk of her skin falling off or something. It is really disgusting and it definitely made me cringe a lot of times. The final act of this movie, there's something that feels almost shockingly similar to The Substance visually, with how a character ends up looking. I'm trying not to spoil it, but yeah, there's definitely some huge similarities between these two movies. This next suggestion might be a little bit pointless as it's one of the most well-known films in this subgenre, but I had to include The Fly from 1986. If you enjoyed seeing the slow, gradual transformation through a scientific experiment gone wrong in The Substance, then The Fly similarly has a protagonist who we watch slowly deteriorate and lose themselves. Someone who is so obsessed with achieving their goal that their own well-being is sacrificed. If you don't know, this movie follows Seth Brundle, who makes a huge scientific and technological breakthrough in teleportation and decides to test it on himself. Unbeknownst to him, a common housefly manages to get inside the device and the two become one. There's a reason why this movie is considered a classic. It's directed by David Cronenberg, who is of course pretty much regarded as the king of body horror, but a lot of people might only be getting into horror recently and haven't seen it yet, or maybe people are just more open to body horror after watching The Substance, so that's why I included it in this list. And speaking of Cronenberg, my next suggestion was actually directed by his son Brandon Cronenberg, and that's Possessor from 2020. If you like the kind of body swap and leading a double life aspect of The Substance, then you should definitely give this one a go. This movie follows an elite assassin, Taysa Voss. The corporation she works for uses brain implant technology to take control of other people's bodies and terminate high-profile targets. But as she sinks deeper into her latest assignment, Voss becomes trapped inside a mind that threatens to obliterate her. This movie is bleak and dark and gets extremely violent in parts, which I didn't really expect going in for some reason. And the gore is pretty intense because it feels more real. Obviously in The Substance, the gore eventually gets so over the top that it becomes a bit slapstick and intentionally campy. So despite its similarities, Possessor is a very different vibe. It It also shows a lot more of the aspect of how it would affect a person psychologically if they actually were able to live inside another body temporarily. We see a scene of her early on where she returns to her own body and she has to take a kind of test where she's describing items from her past and recalling childhood memories. And she's doing this to kind of resettle back into her own body and mind, which I think is a really interesting concept. It's the idea of completely losing your own sense of self, but shown in a very different way because it's not necessarily relating back to beauty standards or self-image. My next suggestion is Revenge from 2017, and this one is not a similar movie in terms of the plot, but I included it because as of now it's the only other movie by the director of The Substance, Coralie Fargeat. And while it's a very different story, if you enjoyed her style as a director, it definitely is still very clear in this movie. If you liked the cinematography in The Substance with all those bright and saturated colours, it's aesthetically beautiful despite the very dark subject matter going on in her. Or if you found the perspective of women's experiences in this world and those kinds of themes interesting, then you'll probably still have a good time with this one. This movie follows Jen, whose romantic getaway with her wealthy married boyfriend is disrupted when his friends arrive for an impromptu hunting trip. Tension mounts at the house until things take a disturbing turn and lead to Jen fighting for her life. It's not as weird or surreal as The Substance. This story feels a lot more grounded in reality, more or less. But it definitely still has some extreme moments of gore and another insanely blood-soaked final act. Like seriously just an absolutely ridiculous, inhuman amount of blood going on towards the end of this movie, just like in The Substance. This director clearly loves to be over the top and just throw buckets and buckets of blood at you, and I love her for that reason, and I'm excited to see whatever she makes next. My next recommendation is American Mary from 2012. Just like The Substance, this is body horror but through the lens of beauty standards, but in this case how it can lead to extreme surgical transformations. American Mary follows a young medical student that is struggling to pay her tuition, but when trying to get a job at a strip club, she ends up being drawn into the shady world of underground body modification. And these extreme body mods are obviously a real life thing to some degree, but this movie shows a very dramatized version of that world. It's got a ton of fascinating side characters who we meet with all their different reasons for wanting to get these surgeries, like one of them called Beatrice, who I'm absolutely obsessed with. She's gotten all this work done to try and basically make herself look like a real life Betty Boop. Our main character is played by icon of the horror genre, Catherine Isabel, and she's a very different character than Elizabeth Sparkle or honestly any of these protagonists from these movie suggestions. She's not insecure or looking for validation. She's very independent and doesn't care about anyone else really. And even though we see her struggling and go through some really awful stuff in this movie, she responds to it in a very different way. She's kind of an anti-hero and definitely a morally questionable character, but she's an absolute badass and someone that you root for regardless. My next recommendation is Society from 1989. If you liked the over-the-top and campiness of The Substance, then you might have a fun time with this one. This movie is one of the most wild things I've ever watched, and if you haven't seen it, I really don't want to give away why. But this film follows Bill, a student who's got a great life but feels alienated from his very wealthy family. His sister and parents mix with other upper-class people while Bill is more down-to-earth. He begins to have suspicions there's something weird going on, or more so it is brought to his attention that his parents and sister are having these secret parties and engaging in some group activities of which families should not be engaging in, to put it lightly. That alone is such a shocking and messed up enough concept, but there's actually a lot more stuff going on beneath the surface. Again, the body horror in this one really stands out. There's a lot of certain body parts ending up in places that they're not supposed to. It is kind of a slow progression until we get to that final act that just takes a full sharp turn into complete madness. Which, just like the ending of The Substance, some people are going to love how ridiculous it gets and some people are going to hate it. It's got a very bizarre and silly tone, so don't go in expecting a super serious horror movie, but I feel like it weirdly fits in with The Substance, how it's set in this heightened reality. It's a very surreal movie and one you kind of need to see to believe. My next recommendation is The Neon Demon from 2016. If you want a bright, colourful movie that's visually stunning like The Substance, but while having some very dark content mixed in, then you should give this one a go. This movie follows an aspiring model called Jessie that's just moved to LA. She's adored for her youth and her looks, which help her to get one step ahead in the modelling world very quickly. But her competition grows jealous, and the group of beauty-obsessed women will take any means necessary to get what she has. So the themes of this one are clearly very aligned with the substance, your beauty being tied to your youth and how that can make somebody snap. We also see some of how the people in positions of power view you as someone to take advantage of and to sexualize. That same horrifying idea of being replaceable and so easily dropped when you're working in an industry that's based around your looks. It has some audition scenes that feel a lot like that audition scene in The Substance. Pretty uncomfortable to watch the way they treat these models as nothing but objects. It has this dreamy kind of romantic aesthetic which really contrasts with the content of the movie, and just a lot of very uncomfortable scenes going on in general here. It takes a while to get into that stuff. This is definitely a slow burn. I know some people don't even consider this a horror movie, and it doesn't feel like one at first, but once things progress towards the end, those horror elements really do come in, and there's some pretty dark and disturbing things going on. So those are my 8 movie recommendations for you if you liked The Substance. But I would really love to hear some more recommendations in the comments if there's any movies I missed that would fit on this list. I'm a new horror channel, so subscribing, liking, commenting, any of that I really appreciate a lot. And thank you for watching.